So, Chapter 2 opened with talking about the development process and how development and distribution are kind of the bookends when it comes to using media content. It talked a little bit about the challenges when it comes to development, one being the fact that media is an experience product, so the consumer doesn't really know if they like it unless they consume it. So that can probably be an issue sometimes when it comes to development. It talked about the stages of development, which were kind of first of all generating the ideas, and then once an idea is chosen to pursue, it's turned into a prototype, which in the case of television and film would be a script. Then there's kind of refining and possible redesigning of that script and maybe bringing in new people to get kind of an objective eye. And then the concept should be tested. But it talks about how that can sometimes be a problem when it comes to media, how there's not really a way to test it. But how television has come up with the idea of a pilot, which allows a script to be kind of tested, if you will. Then it talks about distribution and management, and how that really doesn't have a say most of the time when it comes to the development stages, but how that can sometimes be a problem. I mean, it talks about these creative executives and how they're working with these so-called suits, and how it could actually be productive to have input from the people that are going to be selling the product that you've created. So a lot of the time, unfortunately, merchandising and the need to pull in revenue is a driving force when it comes to production. It talks about the pros and cons when it comes to production of original online media content versus the production for broadcast or release. So while there are lower development costs for the media, for the web, the lower investment could prevent that web content from ever being picked up for television. It talks a little bit about how development is purely overhead and it's all costs and no revenue, and how they have to take into account costs for people, fund for writers, fund for acquisitions and options, legal costs, travel and entertainment, marketing costs, all that kind of good stuff. Discussed a little bit about how there's no test for films like there are pilots for television series, but they've come up with something called mock-ups, and it works best, it said, for animated films, which are kind of like a detailed storyboard with temporary voices added to it to get a sense of timing and a sense of what the story would be like. Then it went into talking about options, which are basically like economic compromises where a producer acquires a property hoping to do something with it and add something to it and then sell it to another party that's going to distribute and finance it. So options balance that time, money, and the uncertain conditions that could possibly happen to protect both the creator and the buyer. Then it goes into talking about marketing ideas and when you're pitching, how you should focus on what the story's about, the main plot, the twists that are going to change the direction of the story and its characters. And then the last part of the chapter talks about protecting content and the law. It talked a lot about copyrights and how an idea alone can't be protected by copyright until it's in some kind of a tangible form. And copyrights basically protect the intellectual property in film and television. It went over about what can be protected in film and television as well as what the owner of those rights is allowed to do, like their ability to sell those rights, even the ability to split them up individually and sell those rights separately, which I think is pretty cool. Then it talks about copyright protection and how it's changed and how it continues to change as digital technology develops. It talks about the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and how it protects ISPs, how peer-to-peer file sharing has threatened copyright protection, and some of those cases that involve peer-to-peer file sharing like Grokster and Sony. Then it went into trademarks and how they're different from copyrights because trademarks don't protect the idea as a whole, but they protect elements of that property that identify its brand. Then the last thing Chapter 2 talked about was piracy, and how it's basically just copyright theft, and how piracy is essentially just providing a property in an earlier or simultaneous time but at lower prices. And then it talked about how digital theft has grown and what organizations like the MPAA are doing to combat piracy. And what I found was interesting was that they mentioned how possibly these organizations working with these so-called pirates may help prevent further digital theft, and it may even convert those pirates into legitimate legal distributors. And that pretty much wraps up Chapter 2.